Hey everyone, and welcome to Chef AJ Live. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about. My guest today is Bill Tara, and he is the author of How to Eat Right to Save the Planet, a plant-based survival guide. Please welcome Bill to the show. It's very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too, AJ.
Well, I love meeting new people, and before you even get in, I know you have a wonderful PowerPoint presentation ready for us, but tell us a little bit about yourself, Bill. How did you become interested in saving the planet?
Well, I was interested in environmental issues in the 1960s. I was one of those people that got turned on by Rachel Carson and Barry Commoner and people that were really early on in the whole environmental era. And my father was a great outdoorsman, and so I grew up kind of with appreciation of that. When I changed my diet in the 1960s, mid-1960s, a lot of pieces came together for me about the connectedness between what we eat and the environmental issues that were so pertinent then and are even more so now. It didn't get any better, unfortunately, but so that's been a kind of a driving force in my life. I concentrated a lot on the health issues for many years. I did health counseling and teaching macrobiotics and different approaches to natural health care in 27 countries around the world. And, so had a lot of experience in dealing with people practically. And these last few years, I've been trying to focus more on the environmental aspects of it, not to the exclusion of the health part, but 13 years ago, my wife Marlene and I formed what we call the Human Ecology Project. And what we're trying to do is to make people more aware that there's more than one reason for them to eat well. That there's environmental reasons, there's ecological reasons, there's of course incredible health reasons, and there are social justice issues there, as well as the animal rights. And so all of those things kind of come together.
Right. So do you still follow a macrobiotic diet?
Well, I still follow my version of it, which is a vegan version, because many macrobiotic people still are pescatarians. And so aside from that, not a whole lot has changed. There is in terms of diversity. And of course, over the last 50 years, macrobiotics has adapted to some of the realities of nutritional science that weren't available at that time. And so, but I would identify myself as a macrobiotic person.
That's great. Did you ever go on the macrobiotic cruise?
Did I ever what?
Go on the macrobiotic cruise that Sandy Pukel does, the holistic holiday at sea?
I went once. Yeah. I went once and it was great. I met a lot of great people, and I've known Sandy for many years. I worked together with him in Florida when he had a center down there. I was together with he and Lino Stancic, and I was one of the counselors at that center.
That's great. That's great. So this book, I'm going to be putting links to it both in the show notes and in the chat. When did you write it, and what propelled you to write it?
I wrote the first version of it about 5 yeyears ago, and I was just distributing it to students. At that time, I was teaching a lot in Spain and Portugal, and I put together basically my lecture notes from those seminars into a book form. And then a publisher here in the States got a hold of it and liked it, and so published it. And it's been published in this present version. I guess about 2 years now.
Right. Well, this is so timely because even a lot of the people in the plant-based world that were vegan or plant-based for reasons other than the planet, they're like Dr. McDougall, for example, he's doing, conferences just on planetary survival now.
Yeah. Well, I think that's where everybody has to go. If I could be so bold, also Colin Campbell, who we're in contact with a lot. He's started a sustainability, of course, and sustainability, which is part of the eCornell courses that they're offering now. And it's a great course. We were invited to be on the cohort of the first version that they did of that to see, just to get a sense of it. And it's a fantastic course. And I know that John McDougall has been doing a lot of good work in that area too. And everybody's just got to get behind that, because it's if there is any issue that is predominant now in the world, it's that. And really, it's amazing and sometimes a little disappointing, the fact that many people who are very passionately engaged with the environmental issue aren't going vegan and just handling it, because that's the best thing that people can do on a day-to-day basis. There's no question about that.
Yeah, and it's what's interesting, it's not even so much that so many people refuse to go vegan, that they just refuse to eat less meat. And a lot of people don't even believe that climate change is real.
Well, there's always been a large strand of stupid people in the world, and let's face it, there's a lot of people who have a vested interest in people not being concerned about the climate, and there's a huge vested interest in people not wanting everyone to go vegan, because the food industry is the largest industry in the world. If you put it all together, not only the agriculture part, but also the distribution and the warehousing and the packaging and the refrigeration and the sales and all of it, you put it together, you got the biggest industry in the world. And I think, it's been pointed out by many people that the carrot and broccoli industry doesn't have much clout when it comes to advertising, whereas these other industries that are around animal agriculture and around the junk food industry, they have billions of dollars to spend.
But can't they see that there's other ways to make money?
Well, it's a question of retooling, and I'm sure that the same thing happened when automobiles were introduced. What were the blacksmiths going to do? When the wheel was first introduced, there's always going to be a shift of technology and application, and people have to adjust to that. The fishing industry is a really good example of that. My family, my father's family, were commercial fishermen, and they saw it. They saw it in the 1960s. They were already talking about it. They were saying, this is not going to be an industry anymore. This is going to be taken over by huge international consortiums, and the small fisher folk that are around the coastal regions of every continent in the world aren't going to be making a living doing this anymore. And so we have to get out of it, and they did. And the fishing industry now, and I'm sure that you're aware of this. This is probably the greatest environmental disaster. That the new documentary Seaspiracy, points a light on that. But people don't realize that that's, for instance, the biggest source of oxygen in the world. It's not the forest; it's the ocean. The ocean is the biggest source of oxygen, and we're killing the ocean because we're killing the life in the ocean and upsetting the balance, the ecology of the ocean, so that the phytoplankton are starting to disappear, and that's what creates the oxygen. So 2 out of every 3 breaths that we take comes from the ocean.
It's just so frustrating that people just don't learn. And what's good is making money when there's no planet to live on?
Well, exactly. And but people hang on by their fingernails, and to very destructive habits, and we all know that. And anybody that's dealt in the arena of healthcare knows that that's the whole name of the game, is breaking habits. How do you break habits? And breaking individual habits, they're the same as social habits. You have to really passionately want to desire to change. You can't change unless you passionately desire change. Right? If you're just sort of namby-pamby about it, then change doesn't happen. And I'm afraid that a lot of we just saw last week, we saw governments all over the world, for Earth Day, making profound announcements about how they're going to kick the can down the road to 2030 or 2050 or beyond. Well, we're going to do something and it's going to show up in 2050. Well, it's up in the air as to what kind of crisis there's going to be by 2050. So we can't keep just kicking the can. We have to stop and do things, and people need to be encouraged to do the things that they can do. And that's why I think food is of such prime importance here, because that's something that people can do that. They can do it. They can live without it. They can be healthier without it, and they can do something with immediate impact. If enough people switched over to vegan, this is a fantasy, but let's say 10%, 15% of the population of the world went vegan. I mean, the carbon emissions would just plummet. And there would be an erosion of some of the fantasies that are there, some of the mythologies that protect change, because there's a lot of mythology to deal with here. People still, Marlene, my wife, was just having a consultation, a Zoom consultation with somebody, health consultation, and it's still, where am I going to get my protein? It's still that far removed. And this was a well-educated, college-educated person. It wasn't somebody that just crawled out of a cave somewhere. This was somebody that was out in the world, successful in business, college education, and they're thinking, where am I going to get my protein? And so there's a lot that we have to cut through in order to get to that place where people say, oh, this is not only desirable from a social point of view, but it's also safe, and it's also healthy, right? I'm going to save myself some money on my health bills, particularly if they live in America, right?
Yeah. I've been vegan for 44 years, and I have been getting that question for 44 years. If I got a nickel for every time I heard that, I'd be one of the richest people in the world. It's amazing that these myths still prevail. Absolutely.
But they're still being taught. They prevail because they're being taught, and somebody once said, it was a nuclear scientist, Niels Bohr, once said that science only changes in one way, and that's old scientists die. and that's what's going on within medicine and nutrition right now. A lot of the people that are still teaching are people that were educated in an old style, in an old approach to nutrition and to health, and they haven't really caught up yet. They haven't caught up with their own research.
Yeah, right. So you have a presentation you prepared for us. I'm so
excited. Yeah, I do. Thank you very much. Right. And if it's okay with you, I'll just jump right into it.
That would be great. Thank you.
So what I want to talk about this evening, and I'll try not to jump in and out too much, but is how to eat right and save the planet. And this is this project, this Human Ecology Project, is something that my wife and I started, as I said, 13 years ago. And one of the reasons for that is because we wanted to address the confusion that's out there. Because of the internet, it's always been there, but because of the internet, the magnification of confusion has been tremendous. And that confusion about what a good diet is, or how to eat well, has been exacerbated by a number of different issues. But when we look at food and we look at what the issue should be, we know that there should be biological needs met, and that's one of the basic things. And we were just chatting about that. People need to know that they can get a complete nutritional diet, and that they don't have to rely on fortified foods. They don't have to rely on animal source foods. They can get those from simple whole foods. Also, people are looking for sensory satisfaction, and that's important with food. Particularly for human beings, but not completely with human beings. I mean, we've been doing a little experiment. We have a big meadow out behind our house, and there's badgers that live there. And Marlene started putting out apples, and the badgers would come at night, and we could watch them out there. They'd come in and eat that. And so we tried different food, and it was very interesting what they would eat and what they wouldn't eat, because there would be some things, certain vegetables they didn't like, other vegetables they liked, certain carbohydrates they liked, other carbohydrates they didn't like. I mean, they would really literally turn their nose up at them. So, I mean, it's not only human beings, but human beings are incredibly hooked on what is the sensation. And that sensation, as most people know by now, it also drives dopamine responses in the body. So we get really literally hooked into food. We're dealing with tradition and emotion. I mean, I'm going to talk about tradition a little bit more later on, but tradition is a big issue with people. They're raised in a family, and the family gets together and they eat the food, and it's kind of a bonding mechanism. And so people get very attached to their food, whether it's an ethnic attachment or whether it's just a taste or particular family thing. People are very influenced by advertising. Advertising is one of the biggest influencers on what people eat. And even when it comes down to so-called natural foods, if you go into a Whole Foods or any of the big chains of natural food companies, and you see advertising on packages that are sometimes misleading, and they're trying to hook you in. I remember one of the most absurd things was I was in Spain, and I saw some kind of brand of water, and it said no cholesterol on the label. And I thought, who the hell ever heard of water with cholesterol? Anyway, but so that we have to be around. And then there's the economy. People suffer under the delusion. I'm sorry, I just skipped my slide over, and I'll just keep talking about it anyway. But people talk about environmental issues. We have to talk about sustainability. We have to talk about food ethics. Now, I'm going to back away a little bit from the issue because I want to put some context here. And that is, if we're going to talk about saving the planet, we have to understand our basic fundamental relationship with our food. And it's the same as every other animal on the planet. And we had a relationship with different types of food, which enabled us to evolve in particular ways. And what we ate became us. And it became us, and it also indicated what we should eat. Now, because human beings migrated to every single part of the planet, there's hardly a part of the planet that human beings haven't inhabited. People found themselves ending up in places where there wasn't a lot of food, or where the food that was available wasn't very varied. It didn't suit all of their purposes. And so what happened eventually over centuries was that people started to migrate, particularly into a concentrated population zone. This is where over 90% of the population of the world since the beginning of human activity have lived. They've lived in this zone that's in the northern hemisphere, above the equator, obviously, and it's a moderate climate zone. And there's some very interesting things about this zone. There's over 400,000 plants on the planet, just species of plants. But human beings only eat out of about 200 of those. So it's a very small range of food, actually, that human beings are adapted to. And the interesting thing is that those adaptations relate to this concentrated population zone. There are foods that naturally occur in that zone. Now, if you go into tropical areas, you get a real abundance of plant life. If you've ever been into a rainforest, it's just teeming with different varieties of plants. But because the density of the plants are so intense, they have a tendency to create a lot of defense mechanisms, the plants themselves. And those defense mechanisms can be toxic. So a lot of the plants that grow in these very abundant rainforest areas are toxic to human beings. So human beings concentrate themselves in that zone. And one of the interesting things, of course, about that is that you can't have animal life on planet Earth without plants, right? Everything on planet Earth comes from plants. Plants are autotrophic. In other words, they can take sunlight and water and minerals out of the soil and CO2 out of the environment and add it together with water, and they create everything that every animal needs. They create the carbohydrates, they create the proteins, they create the fats, the minerals, the oxygen, everything. Everything is created out of those plants. And that's the primary relationship between plants and animals. And out of that, animals can create muscle, fat, blood, every tissue in the body can be created out of what comes from plants. And the reason I'm talking about that is because health is actually a response of what's called homeostasis. Homeostasis is mostly referred to, or when people talk about it, they talk about homeostasis within the body. In other words, the balance between different organs, the chemical balance of the blood, etc. But the word itself actually means a balance with the environment. So it's homeostasis. It's our relationship with the environment. So food has always been the way that we take the environment into our body. That's the outside environment, and we take food in and we create the internal environment, which is the gut biome, which I'm sure a lot of your guests have talked about. And so we won't need to go into that in detail right now, but you're creating this internal environment. So the external environment becomes the internal environment. And that is the process of life. And that's the process of health. If the relationship with the external environment and the internal environment aren't correct, what happens is you get sickness, whether in any species. It doesn't make any difference whether it's an insect, a fish, or a human being. That's when you get out of balance with the environment, that's what happens. Now with humans, the interesting thing is, or interesting to me, it might not be interesting to anybody else, but the interesting thing to me is the fact that we not only have to make balance with the external environment, but we have to make balance with a built environment, an environment that we created. And this is where it really gets sticky, because we've done a really bad job of that. We've created an environment which is hostile to life. Every time I go to New York City, I'm nothing against New Yorkers. I love New York. It's a great city if you're going to go to see some entertainment or go to a museum or something. But I got to say, when I walk into New York City, I think, oh my God, what a challenge to live here. And it's not that challenge like out of the musical, if I can make it here, I can make it anywhere kind of challenge. It's a real physical challenge. The noise levels, the pollution levels, everything is intensified within that environment. We have to figure out how to adapt to that. So what do? We've always been struggling with this. How do we adapt to the environment out there? Well, we made some mistakes. And human beings have made mistakes along the path. We have to acknowledge that. And here was a big one. Because we went to different parts of the world, and some of those parts of the world had maybe poor soil, or they had a very thin atmosphere, or they were desert areas, or they were ice areas, areas with very short growing season, we started to incorporate the use of animals into our social life. Right? Initially, just a small number of animals to make it through when we couldn't get vegetable quality food. The rest of the time, we were eating plant food. And that consumption of plant food is kind of fascinating, because what we know now is that introduction of plant food was there at the very beginning of human evolution. And through that gray zone of evolution up to about 200,000 years ago, nobody really knows what we ate. And one of the reasons nobody knows what we ate is because vegetable matter decays very quickly. Bones don't. So whatever bones were used, if they find an archaeological site and they find a couple of bones, they say, oh my God, these people ate meat. But what we're finding is, as archaeology develops and we get better understanding of it, they keep pushing back that agricultural era. There's one of the famous areas is in what's now known as Israel, on the Dead Sea, and that's an archaeological find on the banks of the Dead Sea, which is called Othala II. And what they discovered there is that 23,000 BC, there were agricultural people living there. They were growing grains. They were grinding grains, which meant they were probably eating bread, making bread. This is like 10,000 years before what we had always assumed was the beginning of agriculture. That's a lot, 10,000 years. That's generations and generations. And that was already developed by that time. So that means it was way, way before then when there was some quality of agriculture happening. So when we inserted an animal in between us and the plants, we did something very interesting. When it went past the area of we have to do this in order to live, we're eating animals and then we're deconstructing the animal. We're taking the muscle, the protein, the fats, the mineral, the vitamins, we're taking that apart and then we're putting it back together again. So the digestive process becomes very wasteful in terms of energy. The amount of energy that it takes to break down the muscle of an animal in our digestive tract and then reassemble it again is just phenomenal, right? In terms of the amount of energy, the amount of caloric energy that's used there, and it may well have had an effect on the development of our brain, even. I mean, this is like the brain is a huge consumer of energy, calories and oxygen. And if you're eating that kind of diet, you're spending so much time and energy digesting your food, it's not going to your head. So that's perhaps another, maybe you invite me on some other time when we talk about that, because that's a really fascinating area, the whole area between what happens in the body, between what we eat and what goes on in our brain. One of the huge mysteries that's happened in terms of modern nutrition is the totally bizarre ignorance of looking at the human body the same way as we would any other animal. And this has been one of the reasons why we've made some of the nutritional reasons that we make. If we came across, say there's a group of explorers and they're exploring the Amazon jungle and all of a sudden they see an animal, God, nobody's ever seen an animal like this before. This is like, whoa, what the hell is that? And we capture it in a cage. The first thing that we need to know is, what does this thing eat? What does it eat? And so if we observe the animal, we can maybe make a lot of distinctions about what it eats by its claws, by its teeth, etc. But if the animal died and we did an autopsy on it, we would know for sure what it ate. But we never did that for human beings. We didn't look at ourselves the same way we'd look at any other animal. I mean, it's a joke, and I know that probably many of the guests that you've had on your show have talked about this before, but it's worth talking about again and again. This is not a carnivore mouth. There is no way in the bloody world this is a carnivore mouth. We don't have canine teeth. We call these canine teeth. They're not canine teeth. People can't tear open an envelope with these teeth. These aren't nails that can grab a hold of a squirming animal. You break your fingernails opening a CD case. I mean, it's just absurd. You don't evolve enzymes in your mouth to digest carbohydrate unless you've done a lot of carbohydrate. You have to eat a lot of carbohydrate in order to get those enzymes, and they don't exist anywhere else. They don't exist in any carnivore at all. Same thing with the stomach, the acid levels in the stomach, the length of the intestines. All of these things should have shown us for hundreds and hundreds of years of medical science, this is not a carnivorous animal. This isn't even a proper omnivore. Can it eat meat? Well, of course it can in a stretch, right? If there's no other form of nutrient available, yeah, you could get away with it, but that's it. You get away with it by the skin of your teeth. And so fatal error number one is that we started relying on animals for food. And we did it primarily for economic reasons. We lost our connection with the soil. We lost our connection with the seasons when we did that. We challenged ecology for profit when we did that, because what happened is that when I started eating macrobiotically in the mid-1960s, one of the things that started bothering me was I didn't live, I was a young man, and I had gone to school, and I was living in another city. And I thought, oh, when I go home for the holidays, it's going to be a horror show, because this is when the whole family gets together. And my grandmother was like a cook that nobody believes, right? She was a cook that everybody couldn't wait for the holidays so they could eat her food, all together. And I thought, oh God, this is going to be a problem. So when I went went home. I worked it out with my grandmother. She was fine. I decided that I would take something with me as an offering. And so I made some carrot pies, right? Very macrobiotic. Two big carrot pies, and I took them. And it's one of these things, a very American thing of passing food around the table, you know, and people taking food. And I kept watching the pies out of the corner of my eye to see if anybody would take some, you know. A couple of people did, but I noticed my grandfather took a piece, and then the next time I came around, he took another piece. And after dinner, you know, when everybody was like falling asleep and doing the traditional thing that people do after they gorge on a big meal like that, I said, so Zeke, I noticed that you like that carrot pie. And he said, I haven't had that since I was a kid. And I said, really? You notice? He said, oh yeah. He said, in fact, I saw that book that because I sent everybody a book, you know, on macrobiotics. And he said, I saw that book that you sent. He said, that's the way I ate when I was a kid. He said, completely. He said, we had a little bit of meat sometimes, you know, but we couldn't really afford it. That's the way everybody ate where he came from. Now, he was talking about the 1800s in Pennsylvania, you know, and that was a diet that was completely coherent with that. He said, oh, that's the way we ate, you know, and we ate that. And then we started making money and we changed our diet. So there's a very clear correlation between, and they all lived to be, you know, ancient, all of them in the family, you know, they had very strong constitutions. They were eating that way. They had very, very vigorous work that they did in their lives. And they ate that way, that they still ate that way. But the myth of man the hunter pursued, you know, and this is something that was leveraged, and it's still, you know, we were talking before the show, we were talking about this thing of protein, but this is still fundamental with men, this man the hunter thing. I do seminars in different countries, and it's more and more, it's mostly women, very few men there. But when I do counseling and I meet men, it's always the fear of tofu, you know, it's always the fear of salad, you know, it's like a challenge to manhood, you know. Where did that come from? Well, that's where it came from, a misinterpretation of Darwin, that if you don't eat meat, you're not a man, you're not a man the hunter. You're not out there striving against the world. You know, you're not out there, you're not vigorous. You're not sexual. You're not a vigorous human being if you don't, which is interesting because in Darwin himself never said anything about the strong surviving. He said the adaptable survive. It wasn't about strength. It wasn't about physical might. It was about adaptability, right? So, you know, we still live with a fatal error, making that change. And then fatal error number 2 was we lost sight of health. And losing sight of health means that we started focusing on sickness and we didn't think about health. There was no thinking about health. You know, when you look at medical literature up to about maybe 30 years ago, right? I mean, there were some people, medical mavericks like Dr. McDougall, who I know is a good buddy of yours, right? You know, there are a few people out there that were doing really good work and that were thinking about health, but that was way outside of the parameters of what was happening in healthcare, and particularly in nutrition. That wasn't happening. Those people were outlaws, and they're still outlaws, by the way. You know, people like Colin Campbell and Neil Barnard, etc. Those of us that are involved in this kind of work think, oh, this is a really good doctor, but they are way outside the mainstream. They're not in the mainstream. The mainstream doesn't want them to be in there, in fact. And I'm afraid that a lot of it has to do with the dollar. You know, there's not any profitability in helping people stay healthy. No profitability, and the profit is in sickness. So it's with pharmaceuticals, it's operations, it's radiotherapy, all of those things. People spend a lot of money on that. And what this fatal error has caused cancer, diabetes, heart disease, stroke, immune dysfunctions, you name it, right? And these are all diseases that are preventable diseases. non-communicable diseases. So I know that some people don't like it, but I've always called them diseases of choice. You have to choose to have those diseases, right? So is there a genetic influence? Yeah, there's a little bit of a genetic influence. There can be environmental influences and a lot, but the 90% of it is down to lifestyle choices. And those lifestyle choices don't happen unless your priority is health and not sickness, not dealing with sickness. Doesn't mean you can't deal with sickness, but that can't be your priority. So what holds us back from all of that? Well, one of the things that stops change is this whole thing of tradition. And there's a number of different things about tradition. As I said, I work in a lot of different countries. And when somebody tells me they eat a traditional diet, I usually think about two things. One is 90% of the time, it's going to be a terrible diet, whatever they describe to me. When they say, I follow a traditional diet, I know it's going to be a terrible diet. The second thing is that usually the tradition is no more than 100 years old, maybe 150 years old. Well, that's not really tradition. That's pretty recent in terms of human history. I mean, when did Americans decide that eating hamburgers or grilled food on the 4th of July was a tradition? When did people start eating turkey at Christmas? That wasn't until the mid-1800s that all of a sudden popped up. Turkey was something that you ate at Christmas. I mean, probably Dickens had more to do with turkeys at Christmas than anybody else because he wrote it in the Christmas Carol. I mean, it's this silliness. We make up these traditions. Actual traditions are usually plant-based, almost always plant-based. And they have to do with things like pickling, and they have to do with things like fermenting foods and, baking different types of bread or, sourdough breads and making pickles and sauerkrauts or miso and tempeh if you're from the Far Eastern traditions. All of those traditions, a lot of it is invented. When we see what's sold every year, like up until the 1950s, turkey was not used commonly at Christmas. It was only when people when the industry discovered that, Jesus, we can raise these turkeys really quick. Turkeys fatten up very quickly. And so what if we just keep selling this? Every time we have a picture of the holidays, we have a turkey in it. Right? Let's make sure there's a turkey every time we talk about it. Let's get the president to make a big deal about communing the death sentence on a turkey, from the Turkey Growers Association. Right? All of this stuff is to create traditions that serve an industry. It doesn't have anything to do with the with actual traditions that we might be used to. And why do we keep doing it? Why do we keep doing it? Well, fear is when we were talking before. Well, why do people still ask questions about protein? They're frightened they're going to get sick. Well, I understand that. I mean, look what was done with calcium in milk. I mean, mothers after World War II, mothers were terrified and consciously manipulated into being terrified about the fact that they weren't going to create their children into healthy human beings by not giving them milk. If you don't give them milk every day, their bones are going to fall apart. They're just going to collapse on the sidewalk one afternoon. If you don't feed them Wonder Bread, have Bill's healthy bodies 8 different ways, you get everything that you need in a loaf of Wonder Bread. This stuff is terrible. Should never be allowed socially for that kind of nonsense to be advertised and to put out there to mothers who have good intentions of creating healthy children, and then tell them that if they don't give them orange juice every morning, they're not going to get any vitamin C. This kind of nonsense just escalates over and over and over again. So fear becomes very important. The whole medical concept of silver bullets, you want to kill the vampire of illness, you take a silver bullet. So it's vitamins, right? Have a vitamin pill, right? So you go to any so-called natural food shop or health food shop, and you see shelves and shelves and shelves of isolated constituents. So nutrition became a chemistry project. So it's not about the food, it's about the chemicals that are in the food. And the more advanced studies that have been done on this shows that the more vitamins and minerals you take as pills, the sicker you are, not the healthier you are. You know, it's in many of them, particularly if you get cheap ones, they just go right through you. You know, they're called potty pellets. You know, in the industry that sells those foods, because they don't even digest. They're just bing. You just hear them on the porcelain on the way out. You get very expensive urine when you're taking a lot of those pills, and that's about the only thing that happens. Miracle foods every year. I mean, as you've been around. I don't mean this in a chronological age, but you've been around the natural food movement a long time. Every 6 months, there's a new food that is going to take care of everything. Everything. You got it's avocados, or it's coconuts, or it's something else. You know, I remember in the 1960s, I was living in London, and there was a rush on Hunza apricots. Somebody wrote a book about the Hunza people in Pakistan and northern Afghanistan. And these people, the thing that they ate that made them healthy was apricots, special Hunza apricots. And so all of a sudden in London, every health food shop you went in had Hunza apricots. Now, I actually am one of the only people that you'll meet who's actually been to Hunza land, right? And I'll tell you right now, that's not why they're healthy. And the apricot trees are pretty small and would never produce the amount of apricots that were being sold in London in 1972 or 73. They just wouldn't have been sold there, right? So it's not that. It's they ate a very simple diet. You know, they ate a plant-based diet, basically, right? So we have all of these things that feed back on us, and we have no sense of, or very little sense. I'm going to try to get back to this slide. I went the wrong direction. These miracle foods that what we should be looking at is simplicity. The world is being ruined by complexity right now. We need to go back to simplicity. And I'm not talking about wearing a hair shirt and eating tree bark, right? I'm talking about people getting back to understanding what food is, and how to use it, how to prepare it in their own kitchens, and the economy of food, as well as the ecology of food. And to get away from the white jacket syndrome. I mean, somebody puts on a white jacket and tells, I mean, the internet is filled with doctors who have a theory, right? Or who have written a book. Well, you know, I've met a lot of people in my life, as I'm sure you have too, and I've met a lot of people that graduated from university with PhDs and they were stupid, right? And so I don't hold that out that because somebody's got a degree in anything, that they have the final analysis, right? The final say on it. This is a pyramid that we made up, which represents our human ecology diet. This is whole grains and whole grains products. And I mean, really whole grain products, vegetables, sea vegetables, raw vegetables, fermented vegetables, cooked vegetables, whole beans, miso, tamari, tempeh, all of these wonderful foods that come from the Orient and that are, you know, why not take advantage of that? They found out how to use soy because they understood that soy was difficult to digest, and that if you fermented it, it became more digestible. So they got the most out of it. So it's a good example of like primitive, sorry, hit the thing again here. Primitive food technology that really works. Fruits, seeds and nuts, herbs, teas, condiments, natural sweeteners, all of those things, you can create such a massively beautiful diet out of those foods. And the thing that's amazing, that amazes a lot of people, is that when you eat those foods, what you're doing is automatically you're creating a diet which creates a suitable economy. It's very cheap to eat this way, very, very cheap. It's a sustainable diet, and it's an ethical diet. So you're not killing animals in order to live. You're not killing the environment in order to live. You're not ruining the economy in order to live. all of these things. This is an ecological way of life. And it really is devastating to me that this isn't being put forward in that way. That people talk about the Earth Day last week, and people get up and politicians get up and they talk about the environment. How many of them say you have to stop eating animals, right? It's the most important single thing that every single person on the planet can do, and it can be done right. That's not true. There's some people in certain parts of the world where food in the big picture is not available, but we should make it available. There's not enough food. If you took like fish out of the economy of Western Africa, it would fall apart. So you have to do something. You have to help those people make that transition. But those of us who are in the West and live in affluent societies where we can march on down to Whole Foods, or we can go to a local supermarket and get organic food, for God's sakes, right? This was like a dream in the 1960s and 1970s. You actually go to a supermarket and buy good quality food, and you can do that now, right? So we need to take a good hard look at that, and this is what the human ecology is about, that food actually needs to be looked at through the lens of ecology, through social justice, through animal rights, through health. All of those things come together in food. It is the bonding force of health. It's the bonding force of society. And we need to take a look at it. These are 2 books, How to Eat Right and Save the Planet, that I wrote. My wife's book, Go Vegan, with a foreword by Colin Campbell. These are our websites down here. I don't know if you post those later, but people can stop it and look. Macro Vegan is where we do our courses, etc. Human Ecology Project is just getting information out. Everything is free on the Human Ecology Project. There's a few things that cost you some money on a Macro Vegan account, like courses, online courses, etc. But it's so nice to meet you, Chef AJ. I've followed your work, and it's always good to meet people that are doing good work in the world, because it needs to happen, right?
Well, thank you. Yeah, and any links you like, I can put in what's called the show notes. Right now, I just have a link to buy your book, which coincidentally is only $1.99 today on Kindle.
Wow, there's a bargain, folks.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, the paperback is a little bit more, but that's really such a deal. So I was taking some notes, and when you had mentioned that the reason some men need meat or feel they need meat is because to not do so would not be manly, but eating meat gives them impotence, which is also not manly.
But that connection has never been made. I remember one time, I think it was in the 1980s, early 1980s. Neil Barnard came to a conference, a macrobiotic conference. Michio Kushi used to invite him a lot to his conferences, and he gave a talk, and in that talk, and it was an open forum talk in Boston, Massachusetts. There were several hundred people there, and he made a comment about impotence and eating meat, and there was a great gasp in the audience. By a lot of men going, "Oh, I don't want to hear about that." But it's ironic, But
even when men get impotence, they're given a prescription for Viagra rather than a prescription to go plant-based.
Well, we'll always go for the quick fix, if we think we can get away with it, right? But we don't. The thing is, we don't get away with anything. It comes back to haunt us. Karma is a real thing, right? You do things and there's repercussions, and you might not get the repercussions instantly, which is kind of a pity that we don't. It's a pity that when we do something stupid, so a big hand doesn't come out and give us a slap right away. We say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I won't do that again." No, but karma doesn't work that way. Sometimes it builds up and we get something happening at a distant time.
Well, my favorite part of the movie Forks Over Knives was Dr. Terry Mason calling it the canary in the coal mine. A lot of people didn't realize that if you have vascular disease anywhere, you have it everywhere.
Yeah. It's all about education. we've just, unfortunately, we've been poorly educated, and when it comes to health, immensely poorly educated. That's kind of a clumsy way of saying it, but it just dropped out, and we need to change that around. We've got a generation coming up here that's going to have to handle the problems that we created, and they need to be educated so that they don't follow the wrong pipers. A lot of it's interesting, this whole Earth Day thing last week. Some of the billionaires made grand statements, Bill Gates and Bezos and Musk and the usual cast of characters. And it's interesting, but all the emphasis was on technologies. Let's find a new technology. We're going to focus on getting a new technology. And see, that suits them fine, because that means people don't change their lifestyle. They just get a new technology. Trust us, folks, you can keep doing what you do, but we get a new magic technology. And so Bill Gates wants to sprinkle fairy dust in the air, and so that it blocks out the sunlight. I mean, that's great. Musk and Bezos once want to build spaceships, which I think is interesting, right? They're both thinking about getting out of here before anything hits. I don't know. We live in a strange world, don't we?
Yep. You bring up that I don't know how many people they've surveyed, but a lot of men do feel that if they don't eat meat, it's not manly. But children, for example, they're not really given a choice. I remember it was Harvey Diamond who wrote Fit for Life, who said, put a kid in a playpen with a carrot and a bunny, and if the kid eats the bunny and plays with the carrot, I'll buy you a new car. So kids aren't given the choice. And so I think you have to develop a taste for meat, because if you'd never eaten it and then somebody, like if you'd been a vegan all your life and somebody serves you, you'd actually think it was quite repugnant, I think, unless you were like in a situation where you were actually starving.
Absolutely. Well, I tell people a lot when I'm having a conversation about meat and meat comes up, I say, look, here's a little exercise for you. What I want you to do is, I want you to chew, if you eat meat, put the meat in your mouth and then chew it at least 15 to 20 times. Chew the meat. If you chew vegetables, the changes alter, and then oftentimes the taste becomes sweeter, like with cereal grains or with some vegetables like carrots, etc. It becomes sweeter. When you put a piece of meat in your mouth, automatically and instinctively, you chew it a couple of times and you swallow it, because what you're tasting there is blood. And after that meat's in your mouth for maybe 1, 2, 3 times, the blood is gone. The blood is absorbed and taken down into the digestive system, and you're left with a mouthful of disgusting fiber. It's just disgusting fiber. People want to spit it out. So if you're eating something that's good, that's nourishing, you should be able to chew it a bit, keep it in your mouth. You shouldn't want to like chew it 1, 2, 3 and spit it out, or swallow it so that you get it out of your mouth so you can eat some more. And particularly because people put lots of sauces and salt and all sorts of junk on meat to make it taste different, right? Yeah.
So if eating meat is manly, why do so many women eat meat?
Well, it's interesting. That may well get me into trouble, but something that I have observed in my life is that women used to eat less meat than men. Now, I don't know whether it was just my family and my community or not, but I know that my mother very definitely ate less meat than my father did. My grandmother ate very little meat. She would have very small portions of meat. Always. It was kind of considered that way. And I wonder whether, as women were challenged, and these were women that grew up before it was really a common thing for women to have jobs, right? So women were at home and they were cooking and doing those kind of chores, and maybe having some other work that they did on the outside. My mother was the first woman in her family that actually had a proper job outside in the community. But I wonder whether the pressure wasn't there for women to take on certain kinds of behaviors that mimicked masculine behaviors. I think that there's a good chance that it was, You know, it came along with the pantsuit. I don't know. So I'm sure somebody will do a thorough study on this.
I've always wondered how many people eat meat because they really like it or because they think they need it.
Well, it's interesting. There's one of the things that I've noticed, and you probably have too. When people stop eating meat for a significant period of time, say it's a month, maybe 2 months, they usually don't want to go back to eating it. That's just my experience. Right? When I have clients and I put them on a diet, and we usually give them a program that's a minimum of 3 weeks, right? Because I think you got to get your body adapted to a new way of eating and get used to digesting the food and all the rest of it. And people don't want to go back. And quite often, men particularly are very surprised about that. Like, oh my God, I can't believe that I'm not craving meat. They may crave other things, but not so much meat. They may crave fried foods or sugary foods. Those are foods with a big dopamine hit. But meat on its own doesn't give you a dopamine hit.
No. You're right. It's not a pleasure trap food. If it's boiled chicken or it is not a pleasure trap food.
No, you got to do something to it. You got to fry it or deep fry it and put a crust on it or put a sauce on it or something.
Well, that's the thing, because very few people would eat meat if it wasn't cooked, or if it was cooked without seasoning or barbecue sauce, or, people like wings, with the barbecue sauce and with the blue cheese dressing. Very few people just like plain animal flesh.
And you can't taste it then. The taste issue goes out the window. If you've deep fried something and then put barbecue sauce on it, you're eating fried crust and barbecue sauce. You're looking for oil and spice and.
So it's really what they like is sugar, fat, and salt more than they like animal flesh.
Well,
so Bill, what do you say about people? So there are people who are, I would call them ethical vegetarians. They would never think of hurting an animal intentionally or eating flesh from a cow or a pig or a chicken, yet they can't give up their dairy products and their eggs.
Well, I think they've never really thought about it deeply. I mean, I'm sorry to be so blunt, but if you can, well, we lived for a while in Scotland. My wife is Scottish, and I don't know if you remember her. She was on your show a while back. She's Scottish, and we lived out in the country, and they would come and take the calves away from the cows at some point, and those cows would cry for days, wail, because their babies have been taken away from them. That's the kind of thing people need to be exposed to. They need to see that dairy food, whatever other health reasons you have, that dairy food is a product of violence toward that cow. And also the size of the udders, because the cow is pregnant all the time. Right, the minute they have the baby, they're impregnated again. Right. So you've got raped animals that are just developing their teats to the point where they're almost dragging on the ground. Whereas if you see a natural cow that's actually nursed its children, the udder's sucked back up and is tight to the body because they're not getting impregnated right away after that. Right? And I don't know. It's just we have a culture which is very focused on violence, and it's just a way of life. Almost, and those bonds are difficult to break because they're embedded. They have to have. We have to have this. We have to have that. No, you don't. We don't have to have it. What we do have to have is a way of living that doesn't kill the source of our being. That would be a good thing to have.
Absolutely. So how can we support you and your work other than getting this book? I think you have other books as well. And are you active on social media? Would you like people to follow?
Yeah, we're on Facebook. We're Marlene is on other platforms. I'm not. I'm Facebook only. That's enough for me. But she's on Instagram, and I don't think that she's not on Twitter. I think we've been reluctant users of of social media. I think me more than her. It took me a long time, but it took me a long time to even use a computer. Not necessarily because I'm a Luddite, but just because there was something about it that seemed distant to me, right? And it's still like, this has been a very much a learning process, this whole COVID the thing, and we've been doing a lot of things on Zoom and like this, but, conferences and things like that. And you start to think, oh, I miss the other person, the other people being in the room, It's probably very old fashioned of me, but, we've done a few classes where there's been people, on the class, and I think, well, this is just not the same when you can actually see the details and get a sense of people's energy in the room, but it's what we have.
Right. But the thing is that we can reach a lot more people this way now.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing.
We say in macrobiotics, the bigger the front, the bigger the back, right? There's always a flip side.
Right. Right. Does Marlene do all your cooking, or do you cook some of your
Well,
own?
she actually does, with the exception of a couple of little things that I do. But it's not because I'm reluctant to do that. But she doesn't like my cooking. Right? She's a much better cook than I am, which I concede. Right? But I'm afraid I still kind of cook in a bachelor way. My cooking is very slapdash and very simple. And also she does cooking for private clients, and she does programs for chefs and private chefs and things like that. And so she's always developing recipes and playing around and doing the kitchen alchemy thing. And that's not really my cup of tea. I'm a good eater.
That's
I'm a very accomplished eater.
It's interesting. It's one thing to, for there to be a belief that meat is healthy, but in recent years, so much has been coming out to attack whole plant foods. So for example, we can't eat rice anymore because of arsenic. We can't eat beans because of lectins. And that bothers me quite a bit.
Well, there's two answers to that question. So let me give you what my real answer is, and then I'll give you an answer that I might give to somebody. The real answer is, for goodness sakes, look at history. Right? Some of the longest lived people in the world have lived on whole grains and beans. Period. Right? And they're not overweight. They're not obese populations. They're healthy populations of people. We talk about people in Okinawa. We talk about people in Greece, whatever. They eat plant-based diets, and they have lots of grains, and they have lots of beans, and they don't have those problems. You would have to eat tons of raw beans in order to get enough lectins to create any kind of a problem at all. It's just a bunch of baloney. It's to sell books. It's a nonsense. The second thing is, which is more, science oriented, is that, of course, plants have defensive mechanisms. That's what I was talking about earlier with tropical plants. All plants have defense mechanisms. People don't think of plants having defense mechanisms, but they do. And the defense mechanisms have evolved over time so that the seeds don't get destroyed, so that they pass through the digestive system of an animal or a bird or whatever, and they come out the other end, and the seed can still germinate. So fair enough, but those animals don't cook their food. Those animals don't cook their food, and they don't soak their food. They don't chew their food. Right? This is just a nonsense. It's one of those frustrating things where, this whole nonsense of, and you never know where some of the research comes from. The whole thing, and I think Michael Greger and some others approach this whole thing with arsenic and rice. The biggest problem with arsenic and rice, aside from the naturally occurring arsenic that occurs in many plants, right? In many popular plants like almonds, for instance, right, have lots of arsenic in them, right? So aside from that, these plants were being fertilized with chicken manure. and they were in fields that used to be cotton fields, and arsenic is used as a pesticide in cotton fields commonly. So if you have fields that are already where the soil is polluted and you grow any kind of food in it, you're going to have a high concentration, a high uptake of that particular toxin. So it's just, again, it's one of those, it's a nonsense thing. And I feel like people are grabbing for some exotic theory to come up with to make people frightened of their food. Think about how these foods were used in the past and what kind of health was there with those people that were eating that kind of food. I don't care what kind of food it is. If you look in the past and you go back 2, 3, 4 generations and you say, how healthy were these people? Did they have robust health, right?
Right.
Yeah, if they did, then you probably don't
And
need to
actually,
worry.
our ancestors, they had to eat whatever they could get their hands on to survive.
Absolutely.
Today, we actually have options.
Yeah, maybe too many options, right? I
Yeah.
think too many options. And it's one of the things that's just, I mean, we have, when I was growing up, and you're younger than me, but when I was growing up, there was only one kind of potato chip. It was a potato chip, and it always had salt on it. Right? It was salt. Now there's about 25 kinds of potato chips. You can get potato chips that taste like pork. You can get potato chips that taste like chicken. You can get potato chips that taste like they have cheese in them. I can get every kind of potato chip. So what we've done is we've created an illusion of this incredible diversity, which is just a chemical trick.
Yeah.
All it is chemical trickery. The food scientists have had a heyday since the end of World War II. Food scientists have just had a marvelous time, right? What was it, a couple of years ago, we were doing a little project, and I went and I took the pictures of labels in the supermarket of different kinds of foods, and I found what was it called, a frozen strawberry cheesecake. And it had about 30 ingredients in it. And 2 things that weren't in it were strawberries or any kind of cheese or dairy food. A frozen strawberry cheesecake. It was just a chemical mixture, gunk. Life is great.
Well, yeah, and that's the other problem, is even if people believe they need to eat meat, I mean, this whole don't get me started. It's too upsetting. But I have a fun question from Manica. What's your favorite meal, and what's your family's holiday go-to meal?
My favorite meal is something that I have every day, right? And that is that every day I have a bowl of brown rice porridge with a variety of seeds and nuts in it, and sometimes a little bit of natto. I don't know if you know what natto is.
I know what it is. It's kind of stinky, right?
Yeah. Some people call it stinky beans, right? It's a very nice nutritional supplement almost, right? I have that every morning. I like Italian-oriented food. I'm a fan of good pastas. We use like non-gluten or low gluten pastas sometimes with sauces. That's something that we like, but we eat really simple food. I mean, even though Marlene can cook incredible food and does a lot of the time, the actual list of ingredients that we use is very small. We beans every day, we eat whole grains every day, we eat lots of vegetables, different kinds of vegetables. The best that we can get that's seasonal for here. In England, it's not the same as in the States. You can't get the diversity of vegetable quality foods that you can in the United States. I mean, people complain about not getting enough variety in their diet, and they live in America. There's something wrong with them, or they're living in the middle of Nebraska, and there's something wrong with that, right? I mean, you get incredible diversity of food there. So yeah, those foods are very nice for me. I also like some Japanese oriented foods. we make, this is one thing I make, what is my sushi rolls, right? I make sushi rolls every week, one night when Marlene doesn't have to cook. I make sushi rolls, and we have miso soup and sushi rolls, and sometimes some soba noodles in the miso soup, and some vegetables on the side, right? That kind of thing. Eat pretty simple, right?
You know, most of the people I talk to that have been doing it for a long time, that's what we all say. It's simple.
It is, it is. And it's, and the whole thing too, I'm sure you get this too, AJ, is the thing that was, it costs a lot of money. I mean, we eat like kings and queens. We have only the best quality food. I mean, we buy, and to get organic food over here, I don't know what it's like exactly in the States now, because I haven't lived there for the last 20 years, but the organically grown grains, organically grown grain products, organically grown beans, organic vegetables, all of those foods, they cost more than what's normally used. But Marlene did an experiment a couple of years ago for a charity, for a food charity. And we ate our normal food, and we costed up everything that we used, including condiments. We used some condiments, the Japanese condiments. We were about 20% lower than the national average of food expenditures.
Yeah, that's definitely a myth, because I just had on Emma Roche, who wrote a whole book about it and how inexpensive it can be if you're eating like beans and grains and things like that.
It's interesting. This goes way back. There's a story, and I believe that it's true, about Benjamin Franklin, and that is that there was a point there before the Revolutionary War, when he was publishing his little newspaper, Poor Richard's Almanac, and some of the village or city leaders in Philadelphia got together with him. He invited them for lunch. They said they wanted to have a meeting, and he invited them for lunch. And when they showed up for lunch, he served them all a bowl of oatmeal. And he said, and they were kind of taken aback. And he said, what's this all about? And he said, I just want you to know, because they were going to drive him out of business. He said, you can't destroy me financially, because this is all I need every day. All I need to eat is just this, right? That's it. I don't need anything else to, live my life and to be healthy, right? So forget about it.
Well, it's just been a pleasure getting to know you. And yes, feel free to come back sometime. And guys, it's $1.99 today on Kindle. The paperbacks, I think it was $14. So it's a great book. So please check it out. And thank you so much for the work you do.
Thank you.
Great. Do people tell you you look like somebody?
Pardon?
Do people tell you you look like somebody? Because in the chat, people kept thinking you were somebody else.
Who might that be?
Dave Ramsey, the finance guy.
I don't know who that is.
Okay, Google him, because there is a slight resemblance.
But I do have some doppelgangers around, Funny story. When I was in my younger life, I worked in the theater for a little while, and I had a scholarship to go to New York to study, and I went out to New York, and I was a couple of weeks early before the course started. And when I was walking around on the streets, I noticed that a lot of people kept looking at me, and I thought, it's really weird. What? People keep looking at me like, I wonder, is it because I'm dressed differently, because I'm dressed like a California boy, rather than a New Yorker? And I had a friend there that I had done a season of summer stock with in New Hampshire, and I met him, and we were sitting talking, and he looked at me, and all of a sudden he started laughing, and he said, God, he said, I kept thinking, what is it about you? Have you changed something? And I said, no. He said, you know what it is? He said, there's an ad on the side of buses in New York right now, and it's got a guy that looks exactly like you on the side of the buses. And I told him about people looking at me. He said, that's probably why, because it's almost identical. And then the next day I'm walking around in the street, and I'm seeing all these, it was for a headache thing. It was the guy was holding his head, like this, was aspirin or some kind of headache cure. And I thought, oh my God, it really does look a lot like me, you know. So people were looking at me and thinking, that's you. There's the headache guy.
Well, yeah, you're very personable. And How to Save the Planet, $1.99. What are some of the other books you've written?
I wrote a book called Natural Body, Natural Mind. I have an old book which you can still get on Amazon, used copies, which is called Macrobiotics and Human Behaviour, which was about the link between our physical health and our psychology, based on Oriental medicine. And then I have a novel, a short novel called The Portal of Dreams, which is a fun little book if you're into fiction, particularly if you're into kind of fantasy fiction.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you. You're very personable. It's been fun chatting with you. And maybe you and Marlene can come back together and do something.
Fantastic. Love to do that tango.
That would be great. And thanks all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. Please come back tomorrow when my guest is Ella Major. She's known as the Sexy Fit Vegan, but she'll be here talking about the farm sanctuary she works with called Hogs and Kisses. Isn't that a cute name? Hogs and Kisses?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Take care, Bill. Say hi to